While I was overseas on a work trip, my parents emailed me saying they sold my beach house to cover my sister's gambling debt. They even wrote, "You weren't really using it anyway, right?" I didn't reply or argue. I just contacted the police. They thought the deal was done and everything was handled. But they had no idea what was about to happen when the real estate agent called them. Gemini said the salt water didn't just sting my eyes that morning, it felt like it was dissolving the very foundation of the life I had spent a decade building. I stood on the weathered cedar planks of the veranda, the Pacific Ocean stretching out like a sheet of hammered silver, and felt the vibration of my phone against my palm like a ticking bomb. When I answered, the silence on the other end was heavy with a familiar, suffocating cowardice before my father's voice finally cracked the air. "I've already sold it, Margaret," he said, his tone wavering between a plea and a demand. "The ownership transfer will take place next month." The world didn't stop, though I wished it would. The gulls continued their raucous scavenging, and the tide kept its rhythmic, indifferent pulse against the rocks below. My grip on the railing tightened until the wood groaned, a mirror to the sound caught in my throat. This villa wasn't just real estate, it was the physical manifestation of every hour of overtime, every risk Ken and I had taken, and every no my parents had ever handed me. And now my father had signed it away with a forged stroke of a pen, a ghost of my own name haunting a contract I had never seen. "You did what?" I whispered, the words barely escaping the cold knot in my chest. "Diana is in trouble," he rushed out, the name hitting me like a physical blow. It was always Diana. "She failed at an investment, Margaret. She's $200,000 in debt. They're coming for her." "I thought you'd understand. It's only natural for family to help each other." A bitter, jagged laugh escaped me. "Family? You forged my signature, Dad. You stole my home to pay for Diana's latest disaster. You didn't even ask. You barely used the place," he shot back, his guilt curdling into the defensive anger I knew so well. "Is a vacation home more important than your sister's life?" "She's delicate, Margaret. She isn't strong like you. You've always been the capable one, the one who doesn't need us." Those words, "the one who doesn't need us," were the ultimate gaslighting. I hadn't been born capable, I had been forged in the fires of their neglect. As I stood there, the memories of my childhood came rushing back, not as nostalgic vignettes, but as a series of thefts. I remembered my 5th birthday, the smell of the new rubber tires on the red bicycle I had begged for a year. I hadn't even finished my first lap around the driveway before Diana, 2 years younger and already a master of the performative pout, decided she wanted it. "Diana wants it, doesn't she? You're the big sister, Margaret. Be the bigger person." I had spent 28 years being the bigger person, while Diana remained small, stunted by their indulgence. From the red bike to the pencil case I'd won in elementary school, to the Verrier in the house, if Diana wanted it, it was hers by divine right of her sensitivity. My achievements were background noise to her crises. When I was elected class president, they missed the ceremony because Diana had a hangnail or a bad dream. When I graduated at the top of my class, the celebratory dinner was a spread of Diana's favorite foods because she had failed a mock test and needed the cheering up. I looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a blurred gray line. I had met Ken when I was at my lowest, a freshman at the university windsurfing club, trying to find a version of myself that didn't belong to my parents. I was a disaster on the board, swallowing more seawater than pride, ready to pack it in. Ken, the club captain, hadn't looked at me with the pity my parents gave me or the indifference they showed my success. He had simply held out a hand. "Everyone starts like this," he had said, his smile bright enough to cut through the salt spray. I fell all day long when I was a freshman, too. The trick isn't staying up, it's learning how the water moves. Ken was the first person who saw my effort as valuable. He didn't ask me to be the big sister. He asked me to be a partner. Together, we had built a business from a drafty apartment where the only furniture was secondhand desks and a shared dream. We had spent 5 years of grueling labor, importing marine sports gear, building relationships in Australia, and saving every cent until we could afford this sanctuary on the hill. "This is a crime, Dad," I said, my voice finally finding a terrifying, icy steadiness. "An unauthorized sale is fraud. I'm calling the police." "The police?" He gasped, the sound of a man who truly believed he was above the law because his motives were familial. "Don't be ridiculous, Margaret. You'd put your own father in jail over a house? For your sister. No, I replied, staring at the empty space on the deck where Ken and I usually sat to watch the sunset. I'm doing it for myself. For the girl whose red bike you gave away. For the woman who built this life while you were busy bailing out a ghost. I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt a strange, hollow lightness in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being the bigger person. I was being the person who survived. An hour later, Ken called. His voice was the anchor I needed. He had already spoken to the potential buyer, a junior from our old university, who had recognized the names on the title and called Ken in confusion. The sale was halted, but the damage was done. The betrayal was recorded in black and white, a forged paper trail that led directly back to my parents' dining room table. Are you okay? Ken asked when he arrived later that evening. He didn't wait for an answer, just pulled me into his arms. I smelled the salt on his skin and the familiar scent of the wax he used on the boards. I finally let myself cry, not for the house, but for the realization that my parents would rather destroy me than let Diana face the consequences of her own life. They've been planning this for 3 months, Ken, I sobbed into his shoulder. They lied to the real estate agent. They told people we were moving overseas and were too unstable to keep the property. My mother even told the neighbors we were the ones in debt, that they were the ones cleaning up our mess. Ken stroked my hair, his jaw set in a hard line. It's over, Margaret. They can't hurt us anymore. But the fallout was just beginning. As the police investigation launched, the layers of the deception peeled back like rotting skin. My parents hadn't just forged signatures, they had drained their own retirement accounts, sold off family land, and taken out predatory loans to keep Diana's head above water. She had been caught in a fraudulent investment scheme, another one in a long line of opportunities that Diana was too delicate to see through. When the police questioned my mother, she didn't express regret for the fraud. She wept for Diana. She's not as smart as Margaret, she told the officers, as if my intelligence was a sin that justified my victimization. Diana is fragile. We had to protect her. Even the officers were stunned. The blind devotion had crossed into a collective psychosis. My parents were eventually prosecuted, receiving a suspended sentence that left them financially ruined but physically free, a freedom they used to tether themselves even tighter to Diana's sinking ship. A year has passed since the night I ended that call on the veranda. Life at the seaside villa has changed, but not in the way my parents intended. Ken and I didn't sell. Instead, we opened the doors. We started a foundation, using the property to host kids from broken homes or foster care, children who, like me, were often told they had to be the big ones or were simply overlooked. We teach them to read the waves, to stand on their own 2 feet, and to realize that they don't owe their souls to people who only know how to take. I saw my mother one last time, a few months ago, at a discount supermarket on the edge of town. She looked 20 years older, her back hunched, her eyes scanning the reduced for quick sale stickers on bread. She saw me and turned away, scurrying into the shadows of the aisles. My father is working security shifts at night, standing in the cold to pay off the interest on Diana's debts. And Diana? She's still looking for the next big score, still blaming me for ruining the family because I refuse to let them steal the roof from over my head. Sometimes, at dusk, Ken and I sit on the deck and watch the sun dip below the horizon, turning the water into liquid gold. The pain of the betrayal is still there, a dull ache like an old fracture, but it's eclipsed by the peace of the life we've chosen. We aren't just surviving the waves anymore, we're riding them. Would you like me to look into that new youth program for the summer? Ken asks, squeezing my hand. Yes, I say, leaning my head on his shoulder. Let's give them something they don't have to give back. The betrayal didn't just feel like a loss of property, it felt like a total erasure of my existence. After the police launched their investigation into the forged documents, the true depth of the deception began to bleed out like ink in water. I spent those first few weeks in a state of hypervigilance, my phone vibrating constantly with calls I refused to answer. My mother's name would flash on the screen, a woman who had once tucked me in only to tell me to give my blankets to my sister, and I would simply set the device face down on the cool marble of the kitchen island. I couldn't listen to the excuses anymore. I couldn't hear the word family weaponized one more time to justify a crime. Ken stayed by my side through every grueling interview with the detectives, his presence a silent, unshakable wall between me and the wreckage of my past. It was during one of those long afternoons at the police station that the lead investigator, a man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel, slid a folder across the table toward us. He told us that this wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment mistake. My father hadn't just woken up one day and decided to sell our villa. They had been planning this for months, moving with a cold, calculated precision that made my blood run cold. They had visited the local records office, posed as the primary owners, and had even hired a shady notary to verify the signatures they had spent weeks practicing. My father had spent his evenings at the kitchen table, tracing my handwriting, perfecting the curve of the M in Margaret, while my mother sat nearby, likely knitting or watching television, acting as if they were just doing the Sunday crossword. They told the real estate agent that you and Ken were being relocated to an overseas office in Singapore, the detective explained, tapping a pen against the desk. They said you were so overwhelmed with the move that you had given them full power of attorney to handle your affairs. They even showed the agent emails from you, thanking them for taking this burden off your plate. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. The level of detail was sociopathic. They hadn't just stolen our home, they had invented a whole life for us to explain its absence. While Ken and I were actually working 12-hour days at the warehouse, trying to scale our import business to support a new line of eco-friendly boards, my parents were weaving a tapestry of lies to anyone who would listen. They had even told our neighbors at the beach that we had run into some financial trouble and that they, the selfless parents, were stepping in to save our reputation by selling the luxury asset we could no longer afford. It was a double-edged sword. They got the money to save Diana, and they got to maintain the narrative that I was the failure and Diana was the one who needed protection. Diana's role in this was perhaps the most galling part of the entire ordeal. She hadn't just sat by while our parents committed fraud, she had been the architect of the urgency. We discovered that she had been hounding our father daily, sending him screenshots of threatening messages from the people she owed money to. She played the victim with a virtuosity that was almost impressive, convincing our parents that her life was literally at stake. She had fallen for a classic pump-and-dump crypto scheme, led by a man she had met at a high-end bar who convinced her she was too brilliant for a regular job. When the market crashed and her investments vanished, she didn't look for work. She looked for a scapegoat. "You don't understand, Dad," she had told him, according to the police transcripts of their interviews. "Margaret has everything. She has the successful business, she has Ken, she has that beautiful house. She won't even miss it. If you don't do this, I'm going to lose everything. Do you want me to end up on the street?" And my father, ever the knight in tarnished armor for his favorite daughter, had stepped up to commit a felony. He told the police that he felt it was his duty to balance the scales of fortune between his two children. In his mind, because I was successful, I had enough, and therefore, anything I owned was fair game to be redistributed to the sister who refused to grow up. It was a twisted form of domestic socialism where the only person expected to sacrifice was the one who had actually put in the work. The day the formal charges were filed was a gray, drizzly Tuesday. I remember standing by the window of our office, watching the rain streak the glass, feeling a strange lack of triumph. My parents were being prosecuted for attempted grand larceny and identity fraud. Because they had no prior criminal record, their lawyer was pushing for a suspended sentence, but the financial restitution would be absolute. The sale of the villa had been voided, but the real estate company was suing them for the costs incurred, and the private investors Diana owed were still circling like sharks. That evening, Diana actually had the audacity to show up at our office. She looked disheveled, her expensive highlights grown out and her eyes rimmed with red, but the fire of entitlement still burned in her gaze. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize for the fact that our parents were facing prison time because of her. She walked straight up to my desk, slammed her handbag down, and glared at me. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with a theatrical sort of rage. "You've officially ruined this family. Mom is a nervous wreck and Dad is spending all our remaining money on lawyers instead of helping me. All because you couldn't just let go of one stupid house." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the delicate little sister my parents had spent 30 years describing. I saw a middle-aged woman who had never been told no, a person so hollowed out by spoiled indulgence that she truly couldn't distinguish between a gift and a theft. "The house wasn't yours to take, Diana," I said, my voice flat and tired. "And it wasn't Dad's to give. It belongs to me and Ken. We bled for that place. We worked 3 jobs apiece while you were finding yourself on our parents' dime. You didn't just try to take a house, you tried to take our future. You're so cold, she screamed, drawing the attention of our few employees who were still in the building. You've always been like this. Jealous of me because Mom and Dad actually love me. You think you're so much better than us because you have money, but you're just a heartless, selfish bitch. Ken stepped out from his office then, his face like stone. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer weight of his presence made Diana take a step back. That's enough, Diana, he said quietly. You're going to leave this office right now, and if you ever contact Margaret again, I will make sure the restraining order we discussed with our lawyer is filed by the end of the hour. Your parents are in this mess because they chose to break the law. You are in this mess because you chose to be a parasite. Own it. She looked between us, her lip trembling, searching for the crack in the armor she had exploited for decades. When she found nothing but solid resolve, she spat on the floor, grabbed her bag, and stormed out, the glass door rattling in its frame. That night, Ken and I went back to the villa. We didn't talk much. We just sat on the veranda, the same place where I had taken that fateful phone call, and watched the tide come in. The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. I realized then that the family I had been trying to please for 30 years never actually existed. They were a collection of needs and demands, a black hole that would have swallowed every bit of joy I possessed if I hadn't finally drawn a line in the sand. Do you think they hate me? I asked Ken, the stars beginning to poke through the clearing clouds. I think they're incapable of seeing you as a person, he replied, taking my hand in his. To them, you're just a resource. When a resource stops providing, the person using it gets angry. It's not hate, Margaret. It's the resentment of a thief who got caught. But look around you. He gestured to the dark expanse of the ocean and the sturdy walls of the home we had built. This is real. Their drama is just noise. We're the ones who are still standing. He was right, but the weight of it was still heavy. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood gossip mill went into overdrive. My mother had been very busy before the arrests, telling anyone who would listen that I was a troubled child who had abandoned her family in their time of need. Now that the truth was out, that she and my father were the ones facing criminal charges, the social circle they had spent years cultivating evaporated. People who had once felt sorry for them now looked the other way when they saw them at the grocery store. The shame was a shadow they couldn't outrun. I received one final letter from my father before the sentencing. It wasn't an apology. It was a 4-page manifesto on why I was being unreasonable. He claimed that as a father, he had a moral right to manage his children's assets for the greater good of the family. He wrote about the red bicycle again, but in his version, he was teaching me the value of sharing. He wrote about the university fees, claiming that because they had paid for my undergraduate degree, I owed them a lifetime dividend on my earnings. It was the logic of a cult leader, not a parent. I didn't finish reading it. I dropped it into the fireplace and watched the words "your sister's survival" turn into ash and smoke. As the winter neared, the reality of their situation became even more dire. They had to sell their family home, the house I grew up in, just to pay the legal fees and the initial restitution to the real estate firm. They moved into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to scoff at. Diana moved in with them, of course, because she had nowhere else to go. The 3 of them were now trapped in a small, suffocating space, fueled by mutual resentment and the crushing weight of their collective choices. My mother was forced to take a job at a local laundry, her hands, which used to spend hours at the piano or embroidery, now chapped and red from industrial detergents. My father, nearing 70, was working as a night watchman at a construction site. I felt a twinge of guilt, a ghost of the big sister I used to be, but then I looked at the scars on my own heart. I remembered the nights I had cried myself to sleep as a child because I wasn't delicate enough to be loved. I remembered the struggle of starting our company with nothing but a dream and a few $100s. I realized that if I had let them sell the villa, they wouldn't have been saved. They just would have had more fuel for the fire. Diana would have lost that money within a month, and they would have come back for more. The cycle had to be broken with a clean, hard snap. I stood on my veranda, breathing in the cold, salt-tinged air, and felt the first true spark of freedom. The house was safe. Ken was safe. And for the first time in my life, I was safe from the people who were supposed to protect me. I turned back toward the warm light of the living room, where Ken was spreading out blueprints for our new community project, and I didn't look back at the dark road behind me. I knew the next step would be the hardest, learning to live not as a victim or a provider, but as a woman who finally owned her own life. The silence that finally settled over the villa wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of a clean break. As the final legal proceedings concluded, the reality of my parents' new life became a permanent fixture of the local gossip. They had traded a lifetime of middle-class stability for a few months of chasing Diana's shadows, and now, the three of them were bound together in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale disappointment and cheap detergent. I learned through a distant relative that my mother had become a ghost of herself. The woman who once spent hours selecting the perfect silk for Diana's ballet recitals was now seen scrubbing industrial floors, her eyes perpetually fixed on the ground to avoid the gaze of anyone she might have known. My father, his pride withered into a brittle bitterness, spent his nights in a cold security booth, watching over construction equipment while his youngest daughter, the delicate one, spent her days scouring the internet for the next miracle investment, still convinced the world owed her a fortune. The most painful revelation came when I realized that Diana hadn't just been a victim of a scam, she had become the scammer. She tried to use our parents' names to take out more loans, preying on their desperation until they had nothing left to give but their own exhaustion. They had built a monster out of indulgence, and now they were forced to live in the cage with it. But while their world shrank, ours began to expand. Ken and I didn't just keep the villa as a monument to our success, we transformed it into a sanctuary for others. We launched a foundation that brought kids from the inner city to the coast, teaching them that the ocean doesn't care who your parents are or how much money is in your pocket, it only cares about your balance and your will to stand back up. Watching those children catch their first wave, I saw myself in their wide, terrified, and eventually triumphant eyes. I realized then that my parents were right about one thing: I didn't need them. But they were wrong about why. It wasn't because I was cold or heartless, it was because I had learned to build a family out of choice rather than obligation. On our anniversary, Ken and I stood on the veranda, the salt spray misting our faces. The red bicycle, the stolen pencil cases, and the forged signatures felt like they belonged to another person's life. I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had never asked me to be anything other than exactly who I was. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to look back. I was finally home.